Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening for part 3 of our story, and of course share the story if you know someone who enjoys listening to a good story. So, shall we get started with part 3 of our story?
"But I don't understand," said James. "There is no conceivable way that a car can possibly fit through those trees. An ATV, a bicycle, absolutely, but not a car."
"I think there's a road on the other side of those trees, if my memory serves me well. It was used a lot in the olden days. That's where the accident must have occurred, and we heard it. I think that poor injured lady ran through the trees to see if she could get help on this road, thinking it was likely a busier road. She might find someone who could help her. Maybe her cell phone has been damaged in the crash. She certainly was trying to get our attention. I know she was. I could swear she was saying, 'Help me, help me,' and then she just vanished." That seemed like a plausible explanation to me, as the horrifying smashing sound we had heard of buckling metal was clearly a car colliding into a tree on an opposite road. Someone must be very badly hurt and in urgent need of medical attention. "You saw how befuddled she looked. I think she ran back to the scene of the accident to help out the injured party. Maybe she believes we're calling the emergency services now that we've physically seen her in her distress." We both climbed out of the car, and James wrestled around in the glove compartment to look for a torch.
"You go after the girl,"
he said, thrusting a medical emergency kit in my hand.
"See if you can go to the scene of the accident and give them as much help as they need. I'll catch up with you in a minute. I'm just going to call 911. Call me on your cell phone when you find her and the car."
With James's torch in my hand, I hurriedly scampered through the trees, and I don't mind admitting that I was not terribly confident. The girl could be anywhere in here, and where was this mysterious road I was looking for? It had to be somewhere through the trees. I do remember seeing a road once when I went for a walk in here, but it was a long time ago, and I couldn't remember exactly where it was. I'm not the kind of person that appreciates the dark at the very best of times, but I sternly reminded myself that there were people who were in serious trouble, who were in desperate need of my help, and may potentially have life-threatening injuries. I couldn't afford to be squeamish about the dark. I did not doubt for a second that there had been a catastrophic accident of some kind on the opposite side of the trees. The wind whistled through the trees, the boughs of the trees swaggered like inebriated drunks, and occasionally branches brushed against me like ghostly disembodied hands, nudging me to get my attention, which was a very creepy feeling at this late hour of the night, but I wisely chose to ignore it. After all, these people needed my help. I couldn't entertain my fears. Then I saw the girl again, bounding through the trees. Her back was facing away from me. I ran after her, calling after her, "Please stop! Let me help you! Please let me help you! I think you've been in an accident." Yet again, the elusive girl appeared to have vanished. Where the hell did she go? And what on earth was she doing? Damn, I thought, feeling increasingly frustrated. "Excuse me," I called after her again, trying to step up my speed. But I was met with a stiff, uncongenial silence. Even the crickets and frogs were mute, and the only sound I heard was the rustling sound of the leafy boughs, the whistles of the wind, and my own feet moving very fast, beating against the soft earthen floor. What happened next was I went flying precariously off my feet, as a gnarled pair of roots that I'd failed to see before it was too late, that pierced obtrusively through the ground, tripped me up. For a second I was airborne. Then I was flung violently down a 50-foot drop that at one point I suspect had been an old mining shaft. We had many of these mining shafts in Spokane, Washington, but I ended up on the ground in this deep hollow, surrounded by a thicket of rambling vines, a plethora of fallen tree branches, and hundreds of leaves. And after my fall, I heard some rats scuttling away, as if my swift descent to the ground had scared the bejesus out of them. It certainly had done that to me. Thankfully I'd landed on a soft mattress of leafy mulch and forest debris that cushioned the blow of my fall. But an excruciating pain shot through my right leg. I glanced down at the leg in question and saw a protruding branch that I had fallen on had impaled my leg. I was absolutely terrified as I stared down at my leg, unable to believe what had happened. My heart was pounding violently in my chest, with a very intense adrenal response that possibly helped alleviate some of the pain. My torch had fallen an arm's length away from me, and had lit up the entire square hole of this old shaft. I was too numb to call or cry out, or even scream. I knew that if this tree branch was pulled out of my leg, I'd more than likely bleed to death. How the hell was I going to get out of this particular shaft? Tears began to spill down my cheeks, and I whimpered like a frightened dog. I so wanted to call out to James for help, but really I was unable to scream. A dark, shadowy figure was peering down at me from the top of the shaft. That was when I saw a pair of bright yellow eyes. What the hell was that, I wondered. The yellow eyes went away. I fumbled around for my cell phone in my back pocket of my jeans, but it had gone. It must have fallen out of my pocket. I heard two voices having a discussion together. They were speaking in a strange language and sounded very concerned, but this was a language I did not understand. I sighed with relief. That must be the emergency services. They'd arrived in the woodgrove. They'd likely help me if they heard me. But their language was very bizarre. I had no idea from what part of the world they came from. "Help!" I called out. "Help! I'm down here! I'm down here!" The next thing I know is I heard something climbing down the mining shaft, and then I saw the ambiguous figure standing before me, caught up in the full light of my torch. I was astonished. This was not a human being that I was staring at, but a massive 10-foot-tall burly Bigfoot. Now I was convinced that I must have hit my head very hard and was seeing things. I was delusional. The creature stared at me, observing the long, jagged stick that had impaled my upper leg. The expression on his face grew gravely concerned and very troubled. He scratched his head as his eyes darted from my face to my legs. He appeared to be thinking, and even rubbed his chin, as if in thoughtful contemplation. He began to speak to me in a strange language. "Manikalina qua, hom sashi sana, hoba kikakwina, halina stilanika, zalinika, omokola sikwashana." When he spoke to me, for some bizarre reason, I understood every word. "It's all right. I've got you. My name is Zelinka. We need to keep that stick in your leg, or you will bleed out, and that will kill you. Your people will know exactly what to do. I will get you out of this drop safely." He then picked me up, as if I was just a feather, and climbed stealthily up the 50-foot drop with me and the piece of timber that had impaled me, completely secure in my leg. Before I knew it, he was laying me down gently on the ground. I could hear James's voice calling out to me in the woodgrove. "Pammy, Pammy, where are you?" "Help is coming," the Bigfoot told me. "I'll leave you be. Masikana, hola shakanikwa." Please don't go," I begged him. "Please don't leave me on my own." I didn't want to be left alone, but the Bigfoot gave me an apologetic look. "Bakikwaka, hopasakanasha, holakinakwa." "I don't like to be seen by your kind," he explained. "Masilo, I'm sorry." I nodded, and the creature stealthily slunk away, before I had a chance to even say thank you. When James reached me, there was relief on his face. "Thank God I found you!" "What's happened to you? What's happened to your leg?" He was followed by a couple of EMTs. When the EMTs saw that I'd been impaled, they immediately got me back to the ambulance at record speed. Everything was such a foggy blur, as a needle was plunged into my arm. What about the accident? I blurted out. A woman is badly hurt on that road through the trees. She's got blood all over her face. You need to help her.
Calm down. Everything is fine, young lady. An EMT is checking the grove to be sure there isn't an accident, but I don't believe there is one. Unfortunately, you're not the first to have reported an accident occurring in that grove of trees. In the 1980s, a car barreled into a tree on the other road. The events keep being replayed in our time. We've been called out a few times to that scene, with the same bizarre reports of a woman wearing a Cyndi Lauper sweatshirt with time after time written on it. I think you must have seen her ghost.
I also saw a Bigfoot, I told him. I fell down a mining shaft. He rescued me.
You're delirious, I was told, as I was placed in a trolley and squirreled into the back of the ambulance.
The only thing I remember is the EMT's voices and the sound of the ambulance siren blaring through the streets. Then everything blacked out for me, and beyond that I have no recall whatsoever. The next thing I remember being consciously aware of was the sound of faraway, very indistinct voices in the background. And then the voices appeared to get nearer and nearer. I think she's waking up. Someone was saying, Can you see her eyelids are fluttering? That's a very, very good sign. I could feel someone squeezing my hand, and then I heard my mother's voice. Pamela! Pamela, dear, can you hear me, love? It's your mother. I felt as if I was being caught up in a long, dark tunnel. I was dragging a sleeping bag in my hands across a concrete floor. I was holding my old stuffed teddy bear, Pinocchio, that accompanied me wherever I went when I was a child. I even took him to all my routine dental checkups and asked the dentist to check out my teddy bear's teeth. And he would always give my teddy bear's teeth a clean bill of health.
That bear of yours has no fillings to speak of, he would say. He rarely looks after his teeth very well.
That's 'cause he brushes his teeth with lots and lots of honey, I would say, and the dentist would laugh. I glanced down at the pyjamas I was wearing. They were pink and covered in little bears. I moved towards the voices. I was so lost in that dark void and desperate to get to my mother. But the tunnel was so long, and I was so scared, as there was water at my feet, and ivy growing all over the tunnel, along with a plethora of fallen leaves that clung to the floor in clumps. Then I saw the yellow eyes again, and this time they brought me comfort. They stared at me reassuringly through the darkness, and spoke to me in the strange language that suddenly changed to English in my head.
Kolatanakwa, hilasinakwa, hilivologobalashani, soshakwa. You know you can do it. Just go to the voices. Don't be afraid.
So I obeyed those eyes and moved towards the voices, pulling back the dark veil when I reached the end of the tunnel. And then I heard my mother's excited voice. Oh, my God! I do believe she's waking up. Then I heard Victor's distinct voice. He was talking to my father.
Do you think she'll know who we are when she wakes up?
Then there was an authoritative female voice. She didn't hit her head. Her leg was impaled. She'll definitely know who you are. Don't worry about that.
Thank God, said Victor. That's a relief. I'd hate her to forget who we are, and especially me, because we're getting engaged. Imagine if she forgot we were engaged. Oh, my God, I think she's coming round. She's opening her eyes.
One of my eyes popped open, and then another. I felt so groggy, so disorientated, rather confused. Pamela, it's me, darling. It's your mother. How are you feeling? You gave us quite a shock, you did. I sat up awkwardly in my bed, noticing the drip attached to my arm. Where am I? I asked, as I saw my father, my mother, Victor and James all staring down at me, with earnest looks on their faces. You're in hospital, darling. You've had an operation. You impaled your leg on a branch. How are you feeling? It was so lucky that branch was left in your leg. You could have died.
Do you remember what happened?"
"Oh, yes, I do remember. The mine shaft. I fell down a mine shaft. It was about 50 foot deep."
"You didn't fall down a mine shaft," said James, correcting me. "Don't you remember what happened? I found you on the forest floor. You must have tripped over a root or something and impaled your leg in a tree branch."
"No, I fell down a mine shaft. The Bigfoot rescued me." I could see 4 pairs of bemused eyes glancing at each other, as if to say, "She may have impaled her leg, but I think she's hallucinating as well. I think she's a bit delirious and seeing erroneous things that aren't actually there." My mother whispered. But I knew in that poignant moment that my memory had never been more sharp. But I decided talking about seeing a fallacious, idiosyncratic thing like a Bigfoot would make my family firmly believe that I was suffering from some kind of head injury. So I decided to wisely keep stum. Several days later, "I'm looking forward to the celebratory lunch with my mother," I said to my fiancé Victor, grabbing his hand and giving it an affectionate squeeze. I was physically doing so much better after my rather harrowing operation, and although the site of my impalement was badly bruised, the medical team had done a superb job in stitching me up. I was on antibiotics and painkillers and was doing remarkably well. At one point in the operation, I had lost a lot of blood during the tricky part of the procedure, when the surgeon had very carefully removed the branch from my leg, which was quickly replaced with all the donated blood on standby. If indeed the branch had been removed from my leg in the woods, I wouldn't have stood a chance of survival. It still ached to walk, and I was hobbling around awkwardly with a crutch, but beyond that, I was doing remarkably well. My mother had invited me and Victor to lunch to celebrate our engagement, and James had obviously been invited to the lunch as well. Victor had never been comfortable about my close relationship with my childhood friend, but he had learned to accept that I viewed James like a brother.
"I'm glad things are finally settling down, especially after your accident. My, what a week that was. Who would have thought the week that I proposed to you? Everything goes awry," Victor told me in the car. "You've been quite peaky for a while. I've been rather worried about you. But I'm glad that there's a distinct pink colour in your cheeks again. Thank God everything is finally sorting itself out. And then there's my brother. He's made up with his girlfriend. They're now engaged to be married. And at this rate, they might actually beat us down the aisle. I think things are going to work out very favourably for them. Those two were always meant to be together. I mean, all relationships have hiccups, do they not?"
"But of course," I said. "That's life. Relationships have hiccups. That's a guarantee."
"Well, at least you're healing superbly from your impalement. You scared the hell out of me, babe. Don't ever do that to me again. I thought I'd lost you. I really did. You have still not told me why the hell you were in that wood grove that night with James, and how you ended up being impaled by that branch. You've been very vague and very insouciant about all the details. James hasn't exactly been forthcoming either."
"All will be revealed at lunch," I assured him, my leg trembling nervously. Victor did not know that one of the reasons why James was coming to lunch with us was that I wanted to get everything out in the open. I was done with all the secrets, and I'd told Victor as much.
"You're done with all the secrets? That sounds ominous to me," said Victor,
glancing at me through narrowing eyes, when we rounded the bend and drove up the small red brick driveway to my parents' front door. The door burst open, and there was my mother, looking like she'd been on a holiday to the Maldives, as the dark circles of worry that had plastered themselves unwillingly on her face since she'd learnt of my impalement had thankfully faded, and her sunken cheeks that had weathered a few days of failing to eat had subsequently filled out. My mother's blue eyes, framed by a brand new pair of sophisticated purple-rimmed glasses, were wearing an expression of relief, as if she was viewing the sun bursting through the clouds after a thunderous storm.
"Oh, it is so good to see you, Pammy,"
said my mother, throwing her arms very carefully around me, as if she thought I was so fragile that I might just suddenly break.
"How are you feeling, my love?"
"I'm hurting a lot on the leg that was impaled. I've got a slight limp, but the painkillers are working a treat. It's when they wear off. The pain can be quite explosive at times."
"Well, it will get better. I'm sure of that, my darling. These things take time to heal,"
she said reassuringly, sounding as comforting as raindrops falling down on a tin roof.
"In many ways, dear, you need to be thankful for the impalement. It acted as a plug on your leg. If you had bled out, you know what the surgeon said. You'd have been dead in minutes." "Please don't say that," said Victor. "It scares the hell out of me to think that I could have lost my fiancée. But you haven't, and she's here, right as rain, and she's going to make a full recovery. So we have so much to celebrate at lunch today. Would you please come in? We definitely need to open the champagne." "None for me, Mum. I think I'm going to quit drinking for good." "Oh, well, that just means more for the rest of us, doesn't it? Now I want to show you something, my love. Something that's going to startle you somewhat. I don't think you're going to be best pleased, but so what? I decided I was going to make some changes."
My mother led me into her living room, and I gasped. My mother began to giggle like a schoolgirl, pointing her finger at me. My father bellowed with laughter, and then I smiled.
"I thought you were winding me up about painting the living room orange. But you've actually gone and done it."
My mother's face twinkled like a bright star.
"Do you know what, Pammy? After the horror of your impalement, I returned home one night to our white dowdy walls, and I knew we needed to do something to bring some colour into our lives. I decided to blow caution to the wind. I told your father to go and buy some orange paint, and he could select the exact shade of orange that he liked, and we would paint our living room, and the hell with it. And I want to tell you, I am thrilled with the result. I can hardly believe it. What do you think?"
I drew in a deep breath and said, "Do you know what, Mum? I love it. I thought that this colour choice would be appalling, but the living room, it looks so cheerful."
"I love it too," said my mother. "I'm so glad you love it, Pammy, because I tell you, the moment we put that orange on the wall, I felt so much more positive and upbeat about life. I know exactly what Pierre White was talking about in his book on interior design. I bought some colourful throws, as you can see, and some cushions. And look, it just looks fabulous. You might even think I was in Marrakesh right now."
"It certainly looks vibrant, Mum, and I honestly take my words back. It looks superb."
"You're not the only one who thinks so, my love. Mrs. Bailey from next door has copied us to a T. She's only gone and painted her living room the exact same shade of orange, and it looks swell. She's over the moon."
"Who knows, Mum? You might have started a brand new fashion trend. Next, the articles in the Daily Herald will read, 'Marrakesh invades neighbourhood in Spokane.'" At that, we all chuckled, and my mother led us into the dining room. I gasped as I stared at the table that was set for 5 people, with gleaming silverware and a large bouquet of roses in the centre of the table.
"Mum, the table looks exquisite." "Well, it's not every day your daughter gets engaged. Nor is it every day a child of yours survives a leg impalement," said my mother. "So today we've got so much to celebrate, especially the two of you coming together. I am so delighted about your engagement."
My mother bustled around as everyone chatted cheerfully between delicious mouthfuls of my mother's mouth-watering light and fluffy cheese soufflé that was served with salad for starters. It was absolutely delicious. After the amazing first course was complete, I raised my hand and told everyone that James and I had a story to share, so the table became silent, as all the eyes were now focused on me. "James and I have got something to tell you, something that I need to get off my chest, and it certainly concerns you, Victor. I cannot go into our marriage with any skeletons in my cupboard, so I'm going to tell you because I love and respect you. and because I don't want any secrets between us."
"You really don't need to tell me," said Victor. "Whatever it is, it's in the past. We can move on."
I reached out to squeeze Victor's hand. "Remember when we were celebrating our engagement?" He nodded. "I told you I needed to go to the car to get my mother's French champagne."
"That's right," Victor chuckled. "I couldn't believe it. You were so bladdered. But no, you still wanted more drink. Mind you, I wasn't much better myself."
James interceded.
"I'm afraid that is what Pammy's like when it comes to alcohol. She's like a kid in a candy shop, grabbing every available sweetie on offer, when she can barely stand. That's why I told her she needed to quit drinking. You'll notice she hasn't had any alcohol today. There's some people that just can't drink, and Pammy is one of those people."
"Anyway, Victor, when I went down to the car to retrieve the French champagne, I was completely bladdered. I woke up the following morning in a stranger's apartment, naked in their bed. It was Ian Fleming's apartment. You know the one." There was a solemn silence around the table, as all eyes widened, and my mother was so shocked she cupped her hands over her mouth. "Well, at first I thought that Victor had done some major home improvements to our bathroom, but then I realised the figure in the bed next to me was Ian Fleming, the guy in our apartment block. He claimed I'd thrown myself at him, but I have no memory of the event. I'm so sorry, Victor. I don't know what to say. I honestly am so ashamed. I would never have done this if I hadn't been so drunk." Victor's face went from ashen to white to purple.
"That man," he growled. "He should have seen you were blind drunk. He took complete advantage of you, not the other way round. That really sucks, Pammy. I'm sorry I wasn't there to rescue you."
"Victor, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, been persuaded by this man. I have no idea what happened. Why aren't you mad with me? I was the one that made this dreadful blunder."
"No, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at myself. I should never have let you go to the car in your inebriated state. But I guess I was almost as plastered as you. I also blame Ian Fleming. I'm sorry, but he should have known you were intoxicated. But let's move on from here, shall we? All is forgiven and forgotten. Let's say no more about it."
Oh dear, said my mother, dabbing her mouth with her napkin. "I should never have given you that bottle of French champagne. Then none of this would have happened. Goodness gracious me. You do have to be so careful when you drink, Pammy. You can't let that happen again." "I told you, Mum, I'm never going to drink again." "Oh, well, I think it's just as well, dear. I don't like the idea of you making a dreadful mistake like this again. It's absolutely awful to think you have no memory of the event. It scares the bejesus out of me."
"I think we can safely say," said my father, "that Pammy here has learnt a lesson. She's decided she'll never drink again. Now I think we just need to draw a line under the sand and move on with our lives. We don't need to dwell on this mistake. Things like this happen. But as you can see, Victor is a very reasonable man, and I'm very delighted he's marrying our daughter." "You told us, sweetheart, that you were going to tell us why you got impaled," said my mother. "Well," I said, clearing my throat awkwardly, "as you know, I was so devastated about what had transpired waking up in Ian Fleming's apartment that I phoned up James over here. James is so reliable. I always turn to him when I am in trouble. Anyway, we went for a drive in the countryside to Pilgrim's Way, and that's when I told him what I'd done. And I was asking him for advice about whether I should tell Victor about my great big blunder, or whether it would just upset him too much." "Of course you should tell me, Pammy," said Victor, reaching out to squeeze my hand again. "In marriage you have to get over your hiccups. We were discussing that in the car earlier. You should know. You must never ever keep anything from me again."
"I won't. I promise you I won't. Thank you so much, Victor."
"Don't thank me. It is what it is. That's what relationships are about."
Well, aren't we going to talk about what happened when my daughter got impaled? Please carry on with the story. Well, when we were sitting in the car together, talking, we heard the most dreadful calamitous sound. It scared the hell out of me. It sounded like a car was smashing directly into a tree. We heard it skidding as if it was on tarmac, and then we heard the loud thrashing sound. We saw headlights flashing through the trees. And then we saw this strange girl wearing a sweatshirt with a logo on it, Time After Time, by Cyndi Lauper. She had long frizzy brown hair that I think was a crimp perm or something, and her head was congealed on one side with so much blood. And there was blood spatter all over her shirt. It was quite frightening to see. She was beckoning to us, begging us for help. I think she was saying, "Help me, help me." I was reading her lips, you see. She then just vanished, disappeared from our sight. James hurriedly called the emergency services, gave me his medical aid kit and a torch, and I ran through the trees to see if I could help the girl. We assumed there was a road through the trees where someone had had a catastrophic accident. We were quite sure we were going to see some serious injuries there. My mother let out an audible gasp. She raised her hand. "Please, none of you say another word, will you? I've got something to show you all, and I think it concerns exactly what my daughter is telling you right now. Believe it or not, I know all about that accident. A lot of people heard about that accident in the 1980s. It didn't happen recently. It happened a long time ago. Believe me, I know the story." My mother hurriedly returned to the table. She flicked through her old photograph album from when she was a teenager in the 1980s. She brought out a picture of 3 girls wearing identical sweaters with Time After Time on them by Cyndi Lauper, and the girl in the middle of the picture was the girl I'd seen beckoning to us in the woods, asking for help. "You see this girl here, who died so tragically. She was my very best friend, you know. It's a very, very sad story. You're not the first person to have seen her ghost, my love. I assume that is what you saw." "It is the girl I saw. And that was exactly the same sweater that she was wearing. She must have died pretty soon after this photograph. She did, I'm afraid. I think it was a week later, if I'm right. That girl was just such a delightful girl. Her name was Sandy McGovern. I believe you must have seen her ghost. You aren't the first, nor are you the last. We brought those sweaters as we loved that song Time After Time in the 1980s. It was a very popular song back then, I hasten to say. But I must say I haven't heard it being played in recent years." "Well, the ambulance told us exactly the same thing, Mum. They claim that other people have seen Sandy McGovern's ghost, begging for help at the very late hours of the night. They think the dramatic scene of her death is being played out again and again in our time-space."
"It is extraordinary,"
said my mother, thrusting a newspaper article into my hand, which I read to everyone. 15-year-old Sandy McGovern and her boyfriend, 16-year-old Warren Becker, were tragically involved in a head-on collision on a small road opposite the Pilgrim's Way on Friday, June the 5th, 1985, when Warren Becker lost traction on the road and drove head-first into a powerful tree. The car was a complete write-off. The parents of both teenagers were mortified to discover that in the dead of night, Sandy McGovern had crept out of her home to meet up with her boyfriend Warren Becker. Both kids had been drinking heavily. As post-mortem results reveal, their blood alcohol levels were way above the legal limit, and there was evidence of empty bottles of rum and coke on the back seats of the car. Why their car plunged into a tree on that back road is unknown, but family and friends are devastated about the sudden passing of 2 much-loved members of the community. "My God! We did see her ghost! We saw her ghost, James! Can you believe it?"
"I can believe it, although she certainly did not look like a ghost. She looked as real as you or me."
I proceeded to tell everyone how I'd ended up falling 50 feet into an old mine shaft and how my leg had got impaled.
"But I don't understand, love," said my father. The emergency services did not find you in a shaft. You were discovered on flat ground. James found you himself.
That's because a very large Bigfoot rescued me from that mine shaft. He spoke to me in a very strange language that I couldn't understand, that was miraculously translated in my head in English. He made it very clear that he was going to carry me out of the shaft and lay me safely on the ground. He was careful to leave the branch in my leg. He told me that if he pulled it out, that I would die. He knew about the consequences of having an injury like that. He said I needed to wait for help, and that he didn't want to be seen by any of our kind. He was so intelligent, I can't tell you. And he was real. There is no way these creatures are fictitious. I saw him myself.
I'm sure you're mistaken, said my father. You had a bad fall. You were probably hallucinating. That's what it was.
She wasn't hallucinating, said James, as all eyes turned to focus on him.
After everything that happened, I need to tell you all that I returned to the woodgrove myself. When Pammy told me she'd fallen down a 50-foot mine shaft and a Bigfoot had rescued her, I thought I would investigate the woodgrove myself in the daylight hours. Besides, my torch and medical bag were missing. I hoped I would be able to recover them. So I ventured into that woodgrove. I didn't see any signs of a mine shaft at first. I was convinced that Pammy had had a fall and inadvertently bumped her head, suffering from some kind of delusion. I've heard about people talking about Bigfoot before, of course I have, but I never remotely believed such a fictitious creature could exist. But I also knew that Pammy has never once spoken to me about the cryptic creature before. So for her to randomly mention that she was rescued by such a thing seemed almost credible, because it was preposterous on her part for her to talk about such things. It was when I was ambling through the trees, I came across a muddy path, and in that path I discovered a very sizable footprint in the mud that was so enormous it stole my breath away. I knew that that footprint was not made by a bear, so the only thing I could conclude was that it was made by a Bigfoot. As I continued to walk through the grove, I kept my eyes pinned on the ground, searching for this mine shaft, and that's when I discovered a danger sign and saw an area completely covered in ivy, and when I looked down, I saw a huge square dip in the ground, and a very large dip it was too. Pammy's right, it was about 50 foot deep, and at the bottom of all this ivy was my medical bag and my torch. So it's safe to say that Pammy's story was true. Pamela did fall down a shaft. I can tell you, that part of her story is correct.
My mother gasped. I can't believe it.
It gets better than that,
said James, digging in his pocket to pull out a bright blue stone.
What's that? I asked him. It's for you. It's from your friend, James told me. He asked me to give it to you. He hopes you're feeling a whole lot better. He says it will bring you good fortune.
Sorry, said my mother. You've lost me, James. Will you say that again? What friend are you talking about? Who gave Pammy that stone?
The Bigfoot, of course. Who do you think I was talking about?
You saw the Bigfoot? My mother asked. You can't have. You saw a Bigfoot.
I did indeed. I was standing over the mine shaft, staring into the hollow, when something began throwing pebbles at me. I stood very still, thinking, what the hell is that? And then a head peeped out from behind a tree. The Bigfoot was a little shy, rather elusive at first, but he said to me, how is she, the girl that fell down that hole? I said she was fine, thank you very much. Get this, he spoke to me in a strange language. I didn't understand the language, but I understood every word he spoke to me. How extraordinary, said my father. What did he look like? Well, his body shape was like a bullet. He was monstrously large. I think he was about 9 foot tall. He was huge in girth and stature and weight, with overlong arms and a powerful pair of legs. He moved very gracefully, I have to say. His face was remarkably human. He had a human symmetry, although his nose was flat, his cheekbones very high, and his forehead slightly protruding. But he was rather a handsome fella. He was covered in dark black hair that had a slight auburn hue when it was caught in the sun. "Wow, that's incredible," said my father. "I must admit, I am surprised. I really thought my daughter was hallucinating. But it seems, Pammy, that your story is completely credible. James has certainly validated it."
"Were you frightened of him, James?" my mother asked. James thought about my mother's question for a moment.
"You know what? I don't think I'd call my first impressions fear. I'd say I was more confounded, but very inquisitive and curious at the same time. It's like when you know you should not be seeing something that you're seeing, so you think for a moment that you must be dreaming. I guess I had to pinch myself a couple of times, but when I adjusted to what my eyes were beholding, I guess I just realized it was a Bigfoot. And of course his eyes just were so lovely. They were very kind, so I knew at once he was not dangerous."
"Why?" asked my mother. James shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly.
"I don't know. His eyes were very wise, and as I say, he was very benevolent. The creature spoke to me, and in that moment it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to be talking to a Bigfoot. It was like talking to any other human being. He handed me the stone to give to Pammy, and then nodded very politely and just glided away. I wish I could have spent more time with him, but he was reluctant to say very much. I stood there for a full 15 minutes after he'd gone, watching the insects buzzing around the plants, asking myself, did that just happen? Because when something like that happens, it's hard to believe it was real."
I studied the stone that I'd been given, which was passed around the table, with everyone going, "My God, that's incredible!" My mother suddenly gasped, "I've forgotten! The roast lamb! It's in the oven! It might be getting burnt!" she said, dashing back to the kitchen. I held the stone in my hands, with a warm smile creeping up on my face. And I've got that stone now, made into a beautiful pendant, and I wear it all the time, and I believe it brings me luck wherever I go. I've been happily married to Victor now for 10 years. We have 2 little toddlers, and James is still one of my very best friends. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. My word, I can't imagine what it must be like to wake up in somebody else's apartment and you have no idea where you are. At first you think it's your own apartment, and then you realize, how did I get here? And it must be quite terrifying to have no memory of why you're in that apartment. What an incredible story it was, and being able to see the ghost of someone who died so many years before, and to know that you'd actually witnessed that, and then to stumble down a mine shaft like that and impale your leg, and nobody believes your Bigfoot story until it's actually affirmed. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.